Hey everybody, welcome on back. For the past couple of days, you've been kind of examining this trend that we see emerging throughout Europe, really as a result of the Renaissance, with this sort of rebirth in interest in culture, human questioning spirit, humanism, sort of the power of the individual, and really going into the Protestant Reformation as we see individuals more willing to question authority. Devices like the printing press are going to spread the ideas of people like Martin Luther, who are going to essentially undermine or question the authority of the Catholic Church, which they saw as being corrupt. So we really do see a time of essentially political, social, and religious change and instability in Europe as sort of the traditional people who had held power are now being questioned. Right? So whether that be the church or whether that be, to a lesser extent, certain monarchs or kings and queens are going to have their authority challenged. Now, we will see certain individuals who see this as an opportunity to really step in and assert their authority. So two individuals that we're going to be looking at over the next couple of days are Louis XIV of France and Peter the Great of Russia. Today, specifically, we're going to be focusing on Louis XIV. I know the aim says, Louis and Peter. Peter, you're going to be doing in the coming days. But for today, our focus is really going to be on France and how King Louis is going to use an idea known as absolutism or divine right as a way to sort of assert his authority during this time of turmoil and a time when it seems like everybody is questioning authority. We're going to see leaders try and assert or solidify their authority in order to maintain their power during this time of turmoil and chaos. I want you to just take a quick look at the do now I have for you here. And again, I don't expect you to really write anything down, but I want you just to kind of take a look at it really quickly. On the left here, you see an image of Peter the Great of Russia, and on the right, you see an image of Louis XIV of France. And I want you just to think about what are some similarities between these two pictures and how might you describe these individuals, right? And I think you can definitely see that the way that these two are positioned shows that they think very highly of themselves. We see, even on the right here, pictures of Louis, we see extravagant robes. Some even have the color purple on them, right? And purple, like we talked about a couple of weeks ago, is the color of royalty, right? Purple was created from a dye that came from crushing up, it sounds disgusting, but crushing up snails, which were very rare. So if you had access to purple dye and purple clothes, it showed off your wealth. And you can see over here on the side of Peter the Great of Russia, who you'll be looking at in the coming days, you can see, the suit of armor along with these extravagant robes, kind of showing off this idea of power and strength and wealth, which are going to be really important towards projecting power and projecting authority during this time of, like I had said previously, this time of chaos, this time of upheaval, and this time of questioning of traditional authority. So this idea of absolutism, there's a couple of key points that go into this. Right? I think when we look at the word absolutism, you see the word absolute, right? Absolute means total. So divine right was a theory that was really at the heart of the age of absolutism. So divine right was a theory that God directly gave an absolute monarch, so a king or a queen, the authority to rule. And since the king received his authority to rule directly from God, this meant that the king or the queen, the monarch, had the right to rule completely and totally without approval from the people. Right now, I think a lot of us think of rulers in a democracy getting their power to rule from the people. Right? They have a direct responsibility to protect the rights and the freedoms of the people who elect them. That was not the case in the age of absolutism. So in the 16th to 18th century in Europe, the power to rule, the authority to rule, came from God. Right? So it was the idea that the king and the queen should not be questioned, should not be held to worldly standards because they represent a higher power. An absolute monarchy is a form of government where one person, so a monarch, the word mono, meaning one, has absolute or total power. And they used divine right to justify this power. So if anybody would question the monarch and say, what gives you the authority to make these laws or to control the army or to control all aspects of life? The response would be the divine right theory of kings, right? The power granted upon them from a higher being, right? So we're going to see sort of the rise of absolute monarchs or autocrats, which are somebody who has total power. And I think Peter the Great and Louis XIV, who you saw in that intro do now slide, are two really good examples of absolute monarchs who are going to use autocratic powers, meaning all powers to themselves, in order to establish their authority throughout their realms. So some historical context here, specifically with Louis XIV. He's a very interesting individual. Louis XIV is often referred to as ruling during the Great Century because he ruled for about 72 years, almost 100 years in France, which is an incredibly long time for one person to be ruling a country. He is said to embody the principles of absolutism. He gained and consolidated his power using a variety of methods that you're going to be looking at today. And he ruled, like I said previously, longer than any other known European king. So during his reign, he strengthens his monarchy, ushered in a golden age of art and literature, built a royal court at Versailles. He built the palace at Versailles, which will come back to you next year when you talk about the French Revolution. You'll also be looking a little bit today about how he used that extravagant palace to maintain his power. And he's also able to effectively conquer more European territories and establish France as a dominant European power. Okay. Now, some interesting points about Louis XIV. He took over as the crown king of France upon the death of his father, and he was 4 years old when he took power. So imagine being a king and being 4 years old. Right? Obviously, you have advisors and you have people who really are essentially making the decisions for you, because a 4-year-old can't make decisions on how to run a government. But as a young monarch, he received training from his mother, who was from Austria, and also his godfather, who was a cardinal, who was an individual of influence within France as well. So he came from obviously a very influential, wealthy, and loyal family. And because Louis XIV was too young to rule the country for himself, his mother ruled as regent, again, sort of being an advisor or ruling on behalf of him. And his godfather provided political training. So we do start to see the attempts by Louis's family to consolidate the monarch's power, essentially taking power and authority from the ruling nobility throughout France, giving more power and authority to the individual king. And this power consolidation angered nobles as well as aristocrats. So we do start to see rebellions. So at age 9, the nobles and the parliament, who was the lawmaking body of France, remember, the Louis family had tried to take power from the lawmaking body, take power from the nobility, and establish more authority for the king. Right? The king should be able to make all laws. The king should be able to tax the people rather than these, landlords doing that. So this led to a rebellion. Right? This angered many of the aristocrats and the nobles, so the wealthy individuals throughout France, and they rebelled against the crown. This civil conflict was really important because it led to a feeling of Louis XIV feeling threatened. So he sort of had this idea that he cannot trust his own citizens because they are out to overthrow him. So Louis felt humiliated by the arrogance of the nobility and physically threatened at the capital. So he developed a deep fear of rebellion and disorder, and this is going to really impact his ruling strategy going forward. Right? Obviously, if somebody is deathly afraid of being overthrown, they are going to rule with an iron fist. They are going to rule very, very strictly to make sure that they do not get overthrown. So today you're going to examine the methods that Louis XIV used to gain and maintain his power throughout France. I think you'll see very similar strategies to what we're going to see happening with Peter the Great in Russia in the coming days. Right, so remember, this is all just kind of a reaction to this time of turmoil, time of change, time of really questioning of authority throughout Europe that you've been examining. We see almost an overcorrection. We see these monarchs trying to clamp down, solidify their power, and stop this large, widespread, individual agency or push for individual agency that we see happening across Europe. So today I've included for you a quick little video on Louis XIV. You can watch it if you'd like. It's a mini biography. It's a few minutes. And your work is going to be in folder 6.6. And just go ahead and run through that, and you'll see some methods that Louis is going to use to gain and maintain power, and think about some historical connections here. Right? Do we see any similarities to, think back to Shi Huangdi in Qin China. I think back to maybe even Emperor Justinian in the Byzantine Empire. And I think you'll start to see that the methods that monarchs or kings and queens use to effectively keep power is pretty similar over time. So take a look at that again, make some connections, think to yourself if you see any similarities kind of emerging here, and I'll check in with you again tomorrow.